The sun was setting behind the hills when my wife, her brother, and I arrived at the old farm cabin. I'd been here a few times before, but each visit always left me with a strange, uneasy feeling. The cabin sat isolated, surrounded by trees that seemed to conceal something. I tried to shake off the discomfort, telling myself it was just the stillness of the place. We unloaded the car and settled in, the scent of wood and earth filling the cabin. As night fell, we lit a fire in the stone fireplace. Shadows flickered on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. We ate dinner, telling stories and laughing, but the feeling of unease never fully left. As the darkness deepened, my wife suggested we take a walk outside. I wasn't eager to go, but I agreed. We stepped onto the porch, and the cool air wrapped around us like a blanket. I could hear leaves rustling in the distance and the occasional hoot of an owl. My brother-in-law suggested we visit the barn, which was just a short walk away from the cabin. I hesitated but felt a pull of curiosity, so I followed. The barn was old and creaked under our steps. Moonlight poured through the gaps in the wooden walls, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the floor. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced around. The barn was empty, but something felt off. My gut told me we should leave, but we ventured deeper inside. Near the back of the barn, I noticed something strange. A pile of old, discarded tools. My brother-in-law reached out to touch them, and just then, I heard a faint sound from outside, like a whisper. I turned my head, but there was nothing. My heart began to race, and the feeling of being watched crept back over me. I suggested we head back, but my brother-in-law wanted to inspect the tools further. I stood near the door, glancing outside again. The trees stood still, but there was an unsettling feeling at the edge of the woods. A few minutes later, my brother-in-law stepped back, looking worried. He had found an old, rusted saw, its blade stained with dried blood. We exchanged nervous glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. The air grew thick, heavy with tension. Something was very wrong. We decided it was time to leave the barn. Once outside, the atmosphere felt different, charged with an odd energy. I felt a sudden urgency to return to the cabin. I glanced over my shoulder and thought I saw a figure watching us from the trees, but it was gone before I could focus. When we reached the cabin, we locked the door behind us, our nerves on edge. We sat in silence, listening to the wind whispering outside. The shadows inside the cabin seemed to shift and move, and my mind raced with thoughts of what might be lurking in the dark corners. Finally, my wife suggested we go to bed. I agreed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake in the dark, hearing every creak and groan of the cabin. It felt as though the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. In the early hours of the morning, a loud crash jolted me awake. I sat up, heart racing. I looked at my wife, still asleep, then at my brother-in-law, who was already awake, staring out the window with wide eyes. He turned to me, pale as a ghost, and pointed. I rushed to the window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. A large, shadowy figure stood near the edge of the trees, watching us. It was far too big to be an animal. We froze, breathless with fear, unable to look away. Then the figure moved, disappearing into the woods. The silence that followed felt oppressive, like a heavy blanket. We quickly got dressed, and I suggested we leave immediately. We packed our things as fast as we could, the air thick with anxiety. As we drove away from the cabin, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin looked even more menacing in the early light, surrounded by dark trees that seemed to lean in closer. A chill ran down my spine, knowing something had been watching us, something that wanted us gone. We all made a silent promise never to return. The experience left us shaken, but oddly, it brought us closer together. I realized the woods held more than just trees and shadows. They concealed dark secrets, one's best left undisturbed. As we drove further away, the sensation of being watched began to fade, but the memory of that night stayed with me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I couldn't stop wondering if that figure was still out there, waiting for someone else to step into its domain. The woods, with their hidden secrets and darkness, felt alive, and I knew we had escaped something we couldn't fully understand. But what if it was only the beginning? The thought lingered, heavy in my chest. We had rented a small cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway, hoping to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. My husband, Mark, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. That first evening, we settled in, enjoyed a warm meal, and lit a fire in the stone fireplace. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the cabin, the only sounds were the crackling wood and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. The next morning, I woke up early. Light streamed through the window, casting soft shadows around the room. Mark was still asleep, so I decided to take a walk around the property. The air was crisp, and I could hear birds singing in the trees. I wandered down a narrow trail behind the cabin, enjoying the peace and quiet. After a while, I noticed something strange. There were fresh footprints in the mud along the path. They were too big to be from any animal. My heart started to race as I realized they led deeper into the woods. I turned back, a chill creeping up my spine, but the beauty of the surroundings made me brush off my fear. Maybe someone else was hiking nearby, I thought. That evening, we sat outside, roasting marshmallows and gazing at the stars. But as night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I tried to enjoy the moment, but every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump. Mark noticed I was on edge and suggested we go inside. As we settled in for the night, I tried to push my worries aside. I lay awake for hours, listening to the wind howling through the trees. I was about to drift off when I heard something outside. A low sound, almost like a growl. I nudged Mark awake, but he only mumbled and rolled over. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek out the window. The moonlight lit up the yard, casting strange shadows. Nothing seemed wrong, but a sense of dread washed over me. I lay back down, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Around 3 a.m., I heard the sound again, this time closer and clearer. My heart raced as I realized it was coming from the side of the cabin. I quietly got up and looked out the window once more. My breath caught in my throat. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in torn clothes, staring at the cabin. I froze, not wanting to make a sound. He looked wild and dirty, with messy hair and a grimy face. I stepped back from the window, panic flooding through me. I shook Mark awake again, more urgently this time. He sat up groggily, but I quickly explained what I had seen. He moved to the window and peered out, but there was nothing there. "There's no one there," he said, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I didn't want to take any chances. I grabbed my phone and called the local sheriff, explaining what had happened. They assured me someone would come to check on us soon. Mark moved to the door, peeking out into the dark. A few minutes later, we heard a knock. I jumped, and Mark opened the door cautiously. A deputy stood there, flashlight in hand. "Evening, folks. Got a call about a disturbance," he said, shining his light around the area. We told him about the figure I had seen, and he nodded, a look of concern on his face. "Stay inside while I take a look," he instructed, heading toward the trees. The minutes felt like hours as we waited. I clutched Mark's arm, both of us tense. Finally, the deputy came back, shaking his head. "I didn't see anyone, but I'll stay nearby for a while, just in case," he said, giving us a reassuring smile. I felt a little relief wash over me, but the dread still lingered. The deputy parked in front of the cabin, keeping an eye on the woods. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with fear. Hours passed, but nothing happened. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the cabin, I stepped outside, feeling the weight of the night lift slightly. But the memory of that man haunted me. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but I was grateful we were safe. After packing our things, we left the cabin. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in those woods. As we drove away, I glanced back, watching the cabin fade into the trees. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about the man in the shadows. He might still be out there, waiting for the next couple to come along, ready to pick up where he left off. I promised myself we would never return. The woods felt alive, filled with something far more dangerous than any ghost, and I couldn't help but feel that he was watching us leave, planning his next move. The excitement of my university trip to Belgium buzzed in my mind as I stepped into the small cabin nestled deep in the woods near the M Valley. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, a break from the stress of final exams. I came with a few close friends, eager to unwind before we got our results. We had heard rumors about this place, but nothing could have prepared me for what would unfold that night. The sun dipped early, and soon the cabin was cloaked in darkness. We lit a fire in the hearth, its flickering glow casting moving shadows on the walls. A strange chill crept into the room, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just the cool evening air. As we settled in, laughter and conversation filled the cabin, drowning out any lingering unease. After some time playing board games, I decided to step outside for a bit of fresh air. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the tall trees surrounding us. The woods were eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the lively atmosphere inside. I took a deep breath, savoring the peace. Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. At first, I thought it was a small animal, but then I noticed something odd. A pair of eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I froze, my heart racing. The eyes were too high off the ground to be from a deer. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, and watched as the eyes blinked. A strong instinct to run back to the cabin surged within me, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. Just as I was about to turn away, something shifted quickly in the shadows. Panic flooded my chest, and I bolted back to the cabin, my feet pounding against the earth. When I burst through the door, I found my friends gathered together, their faces pale. They had seen something strange too. One of them had spotted a figure lurking just outside the tree line, a shadow that seemed to watch us before disappearing. We decided to stay together and stay awake, watching the dark forest through the windows and listening for any sign of the unknown presence. The hours dragged on, and the only sounds were the crackling fire and the wind whispering through the trees. As exhaustion began to settle in, we took turns keeping watch. I found myself staring into the blackness, my heart racing each time a branch snapped outside. Just before dawn, I felt a strong compulsion to look outside once more. I pulled open the cabin door and peered into the dim morning light. The woods looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but the chill from the night still lingered in the air. I stepped outside, feeling the cool earth beneath my feet. That's when I saw it. A strange, rough marking on a tree trunk near the edge of the woods. A circle with an X through it. My stomach sank as I recognized it from an article I had once read about a secretive group that had operated in the area years ago, known for their clandestine rituals. Feeling sick, I called my friends outside to show them. As we examined the symbol, a sense of dread filled the air. We realized then that we weren't just in a tranquil getaway. We were in a place with a dark history. That night hadn't been a random event. Whatever had watched us in the dark was connected to that history. We quickly gathered our things, eager to leave the cabin that now felt more like a trap than a safe haven. As we drove away, the sun rose over the trees, casting a warm light over the forest. A sense of relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as if we had disturbed something that should have remained hidden. A week later, our college results came in. I had done well, but the experience at the cabin lingered in my mind. I couldn't forget that eerie night. We had gone to Belgium for a break, only to uncover a darkness that felt like it would always follow us. Even as I tried to focus on my future, I kept seeing those eyes in the dark, lurking, waiting. It was a reminder that some places carry the weight of their past, and the shadows we overlook may have stories they want to reveal, stories that are better left untold. I always looked forward to weekends with my wife, Emma, at our cabin in the mountains. It was a welcome escape from my hectic job as a personal trainer. This time, we planned to stay for 2 nights, hoping to unwind and enjoy nature together. When we arrived, the air felt crisp, and the tall trees seemed like ancient guardians of the land. I began unpacking while Emma prepared a simple lunch. After we ate, I suggested we take a hike to a nearby lake I had discovered on a past trip. Emma was excited, and we set off down a narrow trail that wound through dense trees. The hike was refreshing, with the earthy scent of pine filling the air and the soft rustling of leaves overhead. As we walked, I thought about how fortunate we were to have this peaceful retreat. The path eventually led us to the lake, its surface sparkling under the afternoon sun. We sat on a large rock, dipping our feet into the cool water, completely relaxed. As the sun began to set, we made our way back. The light slowly faded, and the woods took on a different feel. Shadows crept in around us, and I noticed the trail seemed to have changed. The trees felt closer, and the path appeared narrower. I dismissed it as nothing, perhaps just my imagination playing tricks. Then, I sensed something, an unsettling presence behind us. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing there. I quickened my pace, urging Emma to keep up. I didn't want to alarm her, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Our steps echoed in the growing darkness. When we reached a fork in the trail, I hesitated. One path seemed familiar, while the other led deeper into the woods. My gut told me to take the known route, but something tugged me toward the other one. I ignored my instinct and chose the unknown. The further we went, the quieter it became. The cheerful sounds of birds had faded, leaving behind an eerie silence. I could feel Emma's unease as she gripped my arm tightly. I tried to reassure her, though I was equally nervous. After a few minutes, I saw movement from the corner of my eye. I whipped around, but again, nothing was there. The unease turned to fear. It felt like the woods were alive, watching us. I urged Emma to keep moving, our pace quickening. Eventually, we stumbled into a small clearing. In the center was an old fire pit, overgrown with weeds. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just an empty space. It felt wrong, as though it held a secret. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind us, and my heart raced. I spun around, but again, only shadows greeted me. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Emma's hand, and we ran from the clearing, desperate to get back on the trail. We kept running, adrenaline coursing through our veins, until the trees started to thin, and we found ourselves back on the main path. Out of breath, I led us to the cabin. Once inside, we locked the door and switched on all the lights. I tried to push the fear aside, convincing myself it was just our minds playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. That night, sleep eluded us. Every little noise made us jump, and I replayed everything in my mind, wondering if we had unknowingly wandered into someone's territory. As dawn broke, the tension began to lift, but the unease from the night before still lingered. After breakfast, I suggested we leave early. I just wanted to get away from the woods as quickly as possible. We packed up in a hurry, still rattled, and as we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. It looked peaceful, but a knot formed in my stomach. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. As we drove along the winding road, I promised myself we would return one day. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that the woods held a darker secret, one meant to stay hidden. I shivered at the idea. What if the woods were guarding something? Maybe a memory from the past or something far darker, waiting just out of sight. The thought haunted me. Nature is beautiful, but it can be terrifying too. Hiding secrets we're not meant to uncover. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if we had truly been alone out there. What if we weren't the only ones who had ventured into those woods? What if whatever was there was still watching, waiting for the next chance to strike? I was deep in the woods of southern Alaska when I stumbled upon an old shack. It looked abandoned, covered in patches of green moss and surrounded by dense trees. The air was chilly, and the silence made the whole place feel strange. I had been hiking for hours, trying to clear my head from the stresses of life, and figured this might be a decent place to rest for a bit. The door groaned as I pushed it open, Inside, the place was thick with dust, and spiderwebs clung to the corners. An old stone fireplace sat against one wall, with a small stack of firewood nearby. The scent of damp wood hung heavy in the air, and the floorboards creaked beneath my boots. It felt like no one had set foot in there for years. I wasn't sure how safe it was, but I was too drained to care much. I settled by the fireplace but chose not to light a fire. I didn't want to risk drawing attention in case anyone happened to be nearby, though I doubted anyone else would be this far out. The sun was slipping down, casting long, thin shadows through the cracks in the walls. I kept catching noises outside, twigs snapping, branches swaying, but I tried to push them from my mind, figuring it was just wildlife moving around. After a while, though, I picked up on a different sound, a steady, measured noise, like slow footsteps. They came from behind the cabin. I froze, ears straining, trying to convince myself it was just the old shack settling in the cold. But the sound was too precise. Slowly, my heart racing, I moved toward the small window on the cabin side and peered through the grimy glass. Nothing. Still, the footsteps were clearer now, closer, as if circling the cabin. I felt every muscle tighten. I wasn't alone. I reached for a thick piece of wood from the pile and gripped it tightly. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, ears sharp for the faintest sound. But there was nothing. A heavy, unnatural stillness filled the air, the kind that makes your skin crawl, like the entire forest was holding back. Minutes slipped by. I kept whispering to myself that it was probably just some animal, nothing to panic over. But then came a new sound from behind the cabin. A slow, harsh scraping, like metal dragging across wood. The noise sent shivers racing through me. It was right outside the back wall. Backing away from the window, I clutched the wood tighter. There was no exit except through the front door, and I had no clue what waited out there. My own breathing sounded too loud in the cabin's tight, still air. The walls suddenly felt closer, pressing in. Then came a heavy slam against the back wall, rattling the whole place. My heart leapt into my throat as I bolted for the door. Before I reached it, another thunderous bang shook the cabin, this time nearer, like whatever was outside was testing the walls. I yanked the door open and tore into the trees, not daring to glance back. My legs burned as I sprinted, branches slapping at my arms and face. I didn't stop until the cabin was out of sight, until even the forest had gone still and quiet. I never returned to that shack. For weeks afterward, I kept trying to convince myself it had been an animal or maybe the wind, but deep down, I knew something else had been out there. Something I never saw but definitely heard. Something that didn't fit. Now, whenever I'm alone in the woods, I can't shake the uneasy feeling that it's still nearby, waiting. The worst part is, I've started hearing those same footsteps at night, even back home. They circle the house sometimes, just like they circled that cabin. And every time, they seem just a little bit closer. I thought the weekend would be peaceful. I rented a small cabin deep in the forest to escape all the noise and stress. The place was far from everything, which was exactly what I wanted. The only other cabin nearby belonged to Frank, an old man who lived a little ways down the dirt road. He was about 72, and all I really knew was that he used to be in the army. He mostly kept to himself. I didn't plan on speaking to him, and I didn't think he'd bother me either. That seemed perfectly fine. The first couple of days went just how I hoped. I relaxed, took some walks, and enjoyed how still and quiet everything was. But there was something odd about Frank's place. Every time I glanced at his cabin, it looked the same. The curtains were always tightly closed, and I never saw any lights on, not even at night. I knew he was there, though. His old, dented pickup was always parked outside, and sometimes I'd hear faint sounds, like shuffling on his porch. By the third night, things started to feel wrong. I was winding down, getting ready for bed, when I heard an odd sound coming from Frank's cabin. It wasn't loud, but it wouldn't stop. It was a soft, steady thumping, like someone lightly tapping on wood. First, I brushed it off. Could have been some animal or just the wind messing with something outside. But the sound kept on. It didn't stop for hours, just this slow, constant tapping. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. The sound echoed through the quiet night and made my skin crawl. Around midnight, the noise finally stopped. Feeling relieved, I managed to drift off, thinking it was all over. The next morning, I decided to walk past Frank's cabin. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I felt uneasy. His place looked as quiet as always. The windows shut, no sign of movement. But as I passed by, I noticed something strange. There were long scratches along the side of his cabin, like something had clawed or scraped at the wood. They were fresh, too. I couldn't tell what made them, but it definitely wasn't something small. That night, the tapping came back. Only this time, it was louder, and I swear it was closer. The sound wasn't just coming from Frank's place anymore. I could feel it, like it was running through the walls of my own cabin. It wasn't random knocking either. There was a slow, steady rhythm to it, like someone knocking on purpose. I sat up in bed, listening, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. I sure wasn't about to head over to Frank's cabin, not in the middle of the night. But the noise was driving me mad. It felt like it was crawling under my skin, and no matter what I did, I couldn't shake this growing sense of dread. Then, just like before, the tapping stopped. I felt a bit of relief, but then came something worse. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps on the gravel outside. And they weren't coming from Frank's place. They were right outside my cabin. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest as the footsteps slowly circled around my cabin. They were heavy, like someone in boots walking with intention. I tried to listen to figure out where the sounds were coming from, but whoever was out there moved too carefully. They knew exactly what they were doing. After what felt like forever, the footsteps finally stopped. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but there was only silence. Somehow, I eventually fell asleep, though it was anything but restful. When I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the windows. I'd had enough. I packed up my things, ready to leave and never look back. But as I stepped outside, something made me stop cold. There were big footprints in the gravel outside my cabin. They were deep, like someone heavy had been walking around all night. And they didn't lead away from my cabin. They led toward it, coming from Frank's place. I glanced over at his cabin. His truck was gone. I got in my car and left as fast as I could. Later on, I heard that Frank hadn't been seen for weeks. Nobody knew where he went or why he left so suddenly. Some folks said he just moved on, but others weren't so sure. There was no clear explanation. The thing is, sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear that soft, steady tapping. It's like it's right outside my window again. Tapping slow and steady, just waiting. And now I can't stop thinking, whatever was out there in those woods wasn't just interested in Frank. Found me too. And one day it's gonna come back. I hadn't been to my grandpa's cabin in Sweden since I was a teenager. I remembered it as a cozy little place tucked deep in the woods, far away from any towns. When I got the chance to return, I was excited. Life had been rough lately, and a week alone sounded like just what I needed to clear my head. The drive to the cabin was long, but once I turned onto the narrow dirt road cutting into the forest, I started to feel at ease. Being out here where no one could bother me felt peaceful. The cabin looked just the way I remembered, small, a little weathered, but still standing strong. The first day passed quietly. I wandered through the woods, trying to recall the trails and landmarks. The trees were tall and seemed to stretch on forever. The air was cold but crisp and fresh, nothing like the city air. That night, I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, sat down with a book, and let the sound of the crackling logs fill the room. But by the third day, the silence wasn't as comforting. I began noticing things. The trees, for example, seemed closer to the cabin than I remembered. I figured maybe my memory was off. It had been years since I was last here. The next morning, I woke up to snow falling outside. At first, it looked beautiful, but as the day went on, it came down harder and faster. It became clear that if it didn't let up, I could end up stuck. I wasn't too worried yet. I had enough supplies for several days, and it wasn't the first time I'd been snowed in somewhere. That evening, I stepped outside to check the snow depth. It was already up to my knees. As I turned to head back inside, something caught my eye. Footprints in the snow. They came from the edge of the woods, leading straight toward the cabin. They were fresh, still sharp, not yet covered by falling snow. I froze, staring at them. They were human footprints, but I hadn't seen a single soul out here. They weren't mine. I hadn't left the cabin all day. I followed the trail with my eyes as it vanished back into the trees. Whoever had made them had walked right up to the cabin and then wandered off into the woods. I didn't want to find out where they led. I rushed back inside, locked the door, and double-checked that all the windows were closed tight. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old cabin made me jump. The wind outside was loud, but I kept thinking I heard something else too. A faint crunching noise, like footsteps in the snow. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind shifting the snow, but deep down, I didn't buy it. The next morning, I checked outside. The footprints were still there, but now they circled the cabin. It was like someone had been walking around, watching. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a lost hiker, but I hadn't seen any other cabins nearby, and no one should have been out in this weather. I stayed inside all day, glued to the windows. The snow kept falling, and the forest seemed to close in tighter, making me feel more trapped. By evening, the prints were gone, buried under fresh snow, but their disappearance didn't make me feel safer. I decided I'd leave first thing in the morning before the snow got any deeper. I didn't care if the roads were rough. I wasn't staying another night. I packed my bag, making sure I had everything ready to go at sunrise. As I was finishing up, I heard it again. Footsteps outside. Slow, heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. They came closer and closer until they stopped just outside the front door. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, barely breathing. I didn't dare peek out the window. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't moving. Felt like they were waiting. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like I couldn't catch my breath. Minutes passed, maybe longer, it was hard to tell. Then, finally, I heard the footsteps move away, back into the woods, slowly fading into the howl of the wind. At first light, I grabbed my bag and ran to the car. The snow was deep, but I didn't care. I managed to get the car moving and drove down the narrow road, heart pounding the entire way. I didn't stop until I was miles away, near the edge of town. I never went back to my grandpa's cabin after that. I still don't know who or what was out there that night. Maybe it was just someone passing through the woods. But a part of me knows it wasn't that simple. Someone or something had been watching the cabin, and they weren't just curious. They were waiting for me to step outside to let my guard down. And the worst part? I have no idea if they're still out there waiting, but I'm not going to find out. Next, I had been behind the wheel for hours, the highway stretching endlessly in front of me like it would never stop. It was late, and the only light came from my headlights slicing through the dark night. I hadn't passed another vehicle in what seemed like ages, and the long, silent drive was starting to get into my head. My eyes were getting heavy, but I couldn't pull over. Home was still a long way off. Out of nowhere, I spotted a small shack on the side of the road, barely noticeable in the darkness. There was a faded highway patrol sign on it, and a dim bulb flickered above the door. I figured I'd pull over, stretch my legs for a moment, maybe check in with whoever was on duty. As I drove closer, the shack looked old and run down, like nobody had been there in years. The door was slightly open, swaying in the breeze. I stepped out of my car and walked toward it, the crunch of gravel under my shoes the only sound breaking the stillness. Inside, it felt colder than outside. I glanced around, the place was a wreck. Papers scattered all over the desk, everything coated in a layer of dust. An old radio sat silent in one corner, and a couple of broken chairs leaned against the wall. There was no sign of anyone, no car, no bike, nothing. I felt a little uneasy but told myself it was fine. Maybe the officer had just stepped out for a while. I was about to leave when something on the desk caught my attention. There were photos, black and white, blurry pictures of cars with different license plates. My eyes fixed on one of them. It was my car, my exact car, parked right where it was at that moment. I froze, staring at the picture. My heart was pounding. How could that picture have been taken? I had only just arrived. I looked out the window at my car. Everything looked the same. But now, a tight feeling crept up my spine, like I wasn't alone, like someone was watching me. I backed away from the desk, trying to make sense of it all, but before I could collect my thoughts, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy steps coming from behind the shack. I looked out the window again. Nothing. I didn't wait to find out. I ran out, jumped into my car, and slammed the door. My hands shook as I turned the key, and I tore down the road, not caring about the speed limit. The tires screeched as I shot back onto the highway, the shack shrinking fast in my rearview mirror. As I drove, I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone chasing after me. But the road was as empty as before. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, still trembling and trying to understand what had just happened. I wanted to tell someone, but what could I even say? I had no proof, just that one picture I saw. A picture I never should have seen. Even now, I think back to that shack. I wonder if anyone else has ever stopped there or if I was just unlucky. But what sticks with me most is the sound of those footsteps. There was someone or something there, and I didn't stay long enough to see what it was. I don't want to know. Whatever it was, it didn't feel right. Sometimes, late at night, I remember that moment. I've tried to put it out of my mind, but then I recall something else. My car was the only one there. But those other photos on the desk, all the other cars. I can't help but wonder, where are those cars now? And what happened to the people driving them? I hadn't been back to the cabin in years, not since Mark was gone. My brother loved it out there in the hills, far from everything. He'd spend entire weekends up there cutting wood, fishing, and doing the kinds of things that made him feel alive. I was never really into it, but I'd tag along sometimes just to hang out with him. One weekend, it was just the two of us. The sky was overcast, and the air felt chilly. We weren't expecting any storms, but something about the wind made it seem like one might roll in. That was the last time I saw him. We'd been chopping firewood near the cabin when Mark said he was going to check something by the pond. I kept working, figuring he'd be back soon, but he never came back. Hours passed, and I started to get uneasy. I searched all over, calling his name, looking through the trees near the water, but there was no trace of him. Nothing. By morning, the sheriff's office came out, and they searched too. But just like me, they found nothing. No footprints, no clues. It was like he had just vanished without a trace. Months later, they told us Mark was presumed dead. They said it was likely an accident. Maybe he fell into the water or got lost in the woods. But I never believed that. Mark knew those woods like the back of his hand. He wasn't the type to wander off or be careless near the water. But what could I do? He was gone, and I had to learn to live with it. Years passed, and I did my best to move on. But sometimes I'd feel this pull to go back, like I needed to see the place again, even though a part of me didn't want to. I guess I thought maybe I'd find some kind of answer if I went back to the cabin. So one day, I packed up and drove out there. It looked just the same as it had the day Mark disappeared. Nothing had changed. I walked around the cabin, through the woods just like I used to with Mark. But something was off. The air felt heavier, and the woods were too still, almost like they were watching me. I made my way down to the pond, and that's when I saw it. One of the trees near the water had been marked, like someone had cut into it not long ago. I stepped closer and saw it clear as day, 2 letters carved into the bark. M.R. Mark's initials. And they were fresh, like someone had just carved them. I just stood there, staring at those letters. My heart was racing, and I couldn't think straight. Mark was gone. I knew that, but these carvings were new. There was no way they'd been there before. I looked around, trying to spot anyone out there, but the woods were silent. The water didn't even ripple. It was just me and those initials cut deep into the tree, like someone wanted to make sure I saw them. I stayed at the cabin that night, but I didn't sleep at all. Every little sound outside made me jump. I kept thinking about those initials, wondering who could have done it. It hadn't been an accident. Mark didn't just disappear. Something else happened that day, something no one ever talked about. By morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I packed up and left. I didn't tell anyone what I saw, and I don't plan to go back. Whatever happened to Mark, I know now it wasn't just some accident. Someone or something is still out there. I think about it sometimes, how those woods feel like they're holding on to a secret, something no one's meant to uncover. And the worst part? I'm starting to wonder if Mark ever really left those woods, and whether whatever took him is still waiting for me. I was really looking forward to the weekend at the cabin with my buddy from the workshop. We had both been swamped with work lately, and a little break sounded like exactly what we needed. The cabin was way out in the forest, far from any homes or roads, and the only sounds we could hear were the wind through the branches and the occasional bird calls. It was peaceful. We spent the first day just unwinding. We did a bit of fishing at a small lake nearby, made a campfire, and sat around chatting about random things while we ate. Felt so good to be away from everything for a while. When night came, we turned in early. The air was cool, and the stillness of the woods was comforting. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something felt off. I couldn't explain it, but I just knew something was wrong. I lay perfectly still, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I caught it. A noise outside, faint but clear. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too steady, like someone slowly moving around the cabin. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I kept listening, my heart starting to beat faster. A few minutes went by, and then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy steps like someone pacing near the door. My heart was racing. I glanced at my friend, still asleep and completely unaware of what was going on. I didn't move. I just prayed that whoever was outside would go away. But then the footsteps crept closer. I could hear them just outside the window. My stomach dropped, and that's when I realized it wasn't just one person. I heard more footsteps, 2, maybe 3, possibly even more. They were moving all around the cabin, like they were checking it from every angle. I stayed frozen, too scared to even breathe loudly. I kept trying to convince myself it was just hikers or some campers passing by. But deep down, I knew. No one should be out here, not this late, not this far out in the woods. Then I heard the doorknob rattle. My chest tightened, and it felt like my heart might explode. I was sure they were about to come inside. But after what felt like forever, the sound stopped, and the footsteps drifted away from the door. I heard them moving off, but I still didn't feel safe. Felt like they were still out there, watching, waiting. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely moving a muscle. My friend slept through all of it, but I couldn't shut my eyes. I kept listening for any more sounds, but once the footsteps faded, it went quiet again. Not the same peaceful quiet as before, though. It felt like the silence was covering something up. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to step outside. There were footprints everywhere, around the cabin, near the windows, right up to the door. They had been circling us for who knows how long. I woke up my friend, and we packed up in a hurry. We didn't talk much as we left. We just kept glancing around, watching the trees and the trail back to the car. When we were about halfway home, I finally told him about the footprints. He didn't say anything, but I saw the look in his eyes. He felt the same thing I did. The worst part is we never saw anyone. We never found out who they were or what they wanted. But they were out there watching us. And somehow I know they're still out there, just waiting for the next group to show up, waiting for someone to make the wrong move. I'd always dreamed of exploring the dense jungles of Central America, far away from the noise of people. I found a small hut deep in the forest that I could rent for a few nights. The owner warned me it was far from everything, and once I got there, I'd be completely on my own. That sounded perfect. No interruptions, just me and nature. Getting there wasn't simple. The path got rougher as the trees thickened, towering above and blocking most of the sunlight. When I finally reached the hut, it was smaller than I expected. The place looked worn down, like it had faced years of heavy rain and heat. The air was thick and damp, and the sounds of the forest never stopped. Buzzing insects, rustling leaves, and the occasional bird call. The first day was peaceful. I wandered around the hut, looking at the plants and trees. It felt good to be so far from the world. But when night came, the mood shifted. The forest at night was like nothing I'd ever known. The trees were so dense that no moonlight came through, and without power, the only light I had was a small lamp. The sounds of the forest seemed to grow louder after dark, as if everything hiding during the day had come alive. By the second night, something felt off. I couldn't explain why, but it was like I wasn't really alone anymore. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just making myself nervous. But as I lay in bed trying to drift off, I heard something. At first, it was hard to pick out from the usual jungle noise. A faint shuffle, then the clear sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps right outside the hut. I froze. My mind raced, trying to figure out what it could be. It didn't sound like an animal. The steps were too slow, too measured. I stayed completely still, holding my breath and listening. The footsteps moved around the hut, circling it slowly, as if someone was walking around just out of sight. It went on for hours. I lay there stiff, listening, too afraid to move. The lamp flickered weakly, casting shadows on the thin wooden walls that felt like they could be torn through at any second. Eventually, the footsteps stopped, but I couldn't relax. I didn't sleep a minute that night, just lay there waiting for the noise to return. When the sun came up, everything seemed normal again. The forest was full of birds and insects, as if the night before hadn't happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. That's when I decided I couldn't stay another night. The peace I'd come here for now felt like a trap. As I packed my things, I noticed something outside that made my stomach drop. Old footprints. Bare human footprints circled the hut, not just once but over and over, like someone had been pacing there for hours. Even worse, they weren't fresh. They had been there for days, and I just hadn't noticed them. I didn't waste any more time. I left as fast as I could, not even stopping for food. The entire walk back through the jungle, I felt like I was being followed. Every sound, every snapping branch made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure I'd see someone standing there, but I never did. I finally made it out of the jungle, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. I keep thinking about those footprints circling the hut before I'd even arrived. Someone had been there, watching, waiting, and the most chilling part is, I'll never know who it was or why they never came closer. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I can still hear those footsteps in my head, slow and steady, circling just out of reach.